Hello and welcome to Neuroshambles, the podcast that aims to shine a light into some of the murkier corners of what it's like to parent neurodivergent kids. I'm Mark Allen, and every episode I'm going to be swapping stories with my guests about some of the frankly ludicrous nonsense we have to deal with on a daily basis. So, if you're anything like me and you're feeling frazzled, overwhelmed and pretty much an outcast from polite society, join me. Hello and welcome to episode 28 of Neuroshambles. As always, it's a joy to have you here, Neuroshamblers. Welcome aboard. Before we launch into this week's episode, I do have a couple of announcements to make. The first one is that this is going to be the last episode of 2024. I'm taking a little bit of a break over Christmas and early New Year, mainly because I'm just knackered and I just need a little bit of time to have a breather, eat loads of mince pies, and then come up smiling again in 2025. That's the plan, right? The other reason is that I released something sort of round about Christmas time last year, and very few people downloaded it. It remains one of the least downloaded episodes, which is a shame because it's an absolute cracker. With Belle, it's the Christmas episode. So if you haven't already listened to that episode, it's still relevant. It still talks about Christmas being chaos in a neurodivergent family. So give that a listen. The second announcement I need to make is that I am now a published author. Somewhat surprisingly. This is a book that Send Reform England released as a follow-up to their Journey into Send Motherhood, which was a massive success last year and had some amazing stories from some amazing mums. And they followed it up this year with Journey into Send Fatherhood. See what they did with the naming there? Pretty sweet, right? And I am genuinely honoured to have been invited to contribute my story to that. So it's basically about dads' journeys into parenting special needs kids. So there are 13 other stories in there as well as my own, so technically I'm a 14th of a published author if we're being pernickety about it. It's a cracking read, if I do say so myself. Just reading the stories from the other dads and the journeys that they've been on has been incredibly heartwarming and inspiring and, you know, occasionally gut-wrenching and heartbreaking as well. So there's a lot in there, and if you know of any Send dads that would benefit from reading the perspective from a dad's point of view on this chaotic and bewildering journey that we go on, then I'm going to put a link to the book in the show notes. Have a click on that just in time for Christmas. Lovely stuff. Anyway, that's all the plugs and public announcements out of the way. I've got another great episode lined up for you where we've got a new guest who was formerly a neurodiversity champion, so she definitely knows her onions, and it was a really great chat with her. We've also got some new neurodiversity champions, some tiny epic wins, and of course some what the flip moments as well. So what are we waiting for? Let's get cracking.
Meet the guest.
So my next guest is someone who has previously been featured in our Neurodiversity Champions section, as mentioned by the wonderful Lisa Galley in episode 18 of season 1. As well as being a single parent carer to 3 autistic children, she is also an author, a blogger, and a disability campaigner. So she's got a lot on her plate. So I am very much delighted that she's found time to squeeze in an additional helping of Neuroshambles. It is the tremendous Danielle Jata-Hall. Hey, Danielle.
I'm doing really well. Thank you, Mark. That's a nice introduction.
I try my best.
I think you're putting me up more than I really am, but I'll take it.
This is the thing. You don't, because people don't realise their cumulative achievements until it's sort of laid out. You go, oh, actually, yeah, I'm doing all right. You're doing all right, Danielle. You're doing a great job.
Yeah, thank you.
So obviously, when any guest comes onto Neuroshambles, we need to understand a little bit more about your setup. So do you want to talk us through the neurodivergencies at play in your household?
So as you said, I'm a single parent to, I'm separated from my ex-husband, and my 3 children are all autistic with a PDA profile.
All of them PDA? Oh, fun in your household.
Yeah. I would say the middle one is more internalised PDA. Mm-hmm. Whereas the younger and older are both more external with their presentation, so you definitely see it more. We have ADHD in the mix with one diagnosed and one waiting on the waiting list. There's probably things like dyslexia. We definitely have anxiety. There's questions over bipolar disorder as well. And so there could be quite a few more. That's around the children. But for myself, I'm autistic as well and likely to be a PDA profile as well.
Okay.
And I'm ADHD. So I only got my 2 diagnoses this year.
So that's a whole other thing to accommodate into your setup as well, isn't it? Once you start seeing things through a different lens and going, oh.
Yeah.
So what are the ages of your children, actually? We didn't cover that.
Sorry, 13, 11 and 8.
13, 11 and 8. So similar to mine. I've got 11, 9 and 7. 2 boys and a girl. The 2 boys are both diagnosed autistic ADHD. The oldest has a very definite PDA profile. The youngest is a lot more anxiety-led. And then our daughter is definitely autistic, but not diagnosed yet. I think is the best way to describe that, on the pathway.
Very similar to our household then, really, isn't it?
And my ex-partner is diagnosed autistic ADHD and obviously has had a huge part in this whole process.
And are you neurodivergent too? Would you think?
I am an undiagnosed neurotypical. That's the way I describe myself now. It's not anything I identify with.
Yes.
So let's crack on with the topic of the week, because there's lots to get through here and I'm quite keen to get into it.
What's the topic of the week?
So this week's topic is one that quite a few listeners have written in and asked me to cover, and that is the subject of medication. Now, before we start, I need to clarify, I am not a scientist or a medical professional. If you've listened to the show, you'll be very aware of that. But essentially, I'm just clarifying that I'm in no way qualified to discuss the specifics of how and why various medications work. That is not what this episode is about. What I am qualified to talk about is my personal experiences of the medication journey with my own kids and how it's affected us. So it should go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, that if you're considering medication for your own neurodifferent children, please seek expert advice and also do your own research. I can't stress that last bit enough as well. You need to be comfortable as parents that you're trusting your own instincts as well. The other thing I want to make clear, again from the outset, there is no medication out there that is scientifically proven to cure autism. I know that a lot of people already know that, but, you know, because it's probably something that you frantically Googled the first time you suspected your child was autistic, because I know I did. But there may be some parents listening to this who are much earlier on in their journey and are just looking for some answers. So I want to nip that idea in the bud early doors. You can't cure autism through medication, or certainly it's definitely not scientifically proven, no matter how many mushroom gummies people try and sell you on the socials. Right? It's not going to work. So as such, any medication we discuss in this episode is going to be about managing some of the many co-occurring conditions that accompany autism, such as ADHD, anxiety and depression. Right, I've got that out of the way now. Sorry, got a bit serious there. I felt a bit like I was telling people off. I'm not. That's not the normal vibe of Neuroshambles, but it's important to know that we're all on the same page before we kick off.
Yeah.
The other thing I thought would probably be quite useful to do is to discuss where medication kind of fits in with our own families as well, because, you know, then you know what we're talking about more specifically. So from my point of view, Otto is currently being medicated for ADHD. He's going through the titration process at the moment. If you don't know what titration is, we will get onto that. Don't worry about it, but it's a flipping nightmare. Jay was prescribed medication for ADHD, but didn't get on with it, so he's not taking it. He has been prescribed anti-anxiety medication, which he is taking, and we're all thankful for that. And all 3 of them are taking melatonin to help them sleep. So that's the little suite of medication at play in our household. What have you got at your end?
So in my end, I've got my eldest, Ariana, is on lamotrigine, which is sort of to treat some of her lability mood swings because they were so erratic. With the potential that could be looking at a bipolar disorder diagnosis. She has been on ADHD medication previously. We've tried a few. They haven't ever had much success for her. But there is a question over a new one that we will start. So I'll come to that when we get to that part later on. The middle and youngest are both not on anything else, but because we're still waiting for an ADHD assessment, which I think that could possibly support the youngest. And all 3 are also, like yours, on melatonin for sleep difficulties. So, yeah. And also, I've just thought, for my own situation, I was one of the situations from having an ADHD diagnosis was a question over whether I wanted to try medication myself. And I have been very hesitant about doing it because I don't know if I feel like I need it. So that's still relevant into the rest of our subjects as we were.
That's really interesting. So you don't feel like you need medication yourself, but you are gonna medicate your children.
Yeah. And this is where I feel like it's really hard to sort of say, because I have to look at what the presentation's like. So for me, it would be to treat being able to focus on one task, because that's really predominantly starting something and not being able to finish, feeling so overwhelmed with the day ahead, not knowing where to start and like how to manage things. That's where I've kind of really struggled. But all in all, I've managed through life being able to do things that are fairly simple, like school or work or, you know, those kind of things. Whereas the daughter that was on ADHD medication, it was to control her presentation, in the fact that she was so anxious and her lack control. So she would attack quite frequently and she would melt down all the time. And she wasn't able to keep a sentence in her mind. That was what used to get her really frustrated when she was about 7 or 8.
Yeah.
Like, she'd attack us because she'd go to say something and then would forget the words and then couldn't get her words out and would get really frustrated. So the idea about ADHD medication for her felt like it could be such a big difference to her life.
Yeah, this is the massive shift that I had to have in my thinking, was that I was not thinking about medication for Otto to control his behaviour for other people and his presentation to other people, because his behaviour is a reaction to the struggles that he's going through internally, right? It's the difficulties that he's finding fulfilling people's expectations. So by resolving those, the behaviour is modified as a byproduct of that. But what I'm not trying to do is medicate the behaviour. I'm trying to medicate the causes of the behaviour, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
And that thinking in my mind was quite a big shift, because initially, in the early days, Tam and I both sort of talked about it, and we decided that we never wanted to medicate our children. That was a line. I was like, I'm never going to medicate my children because the world should just accept them for who they are. You know, the spiky bits and all, that's who they are and that's fine. And the world's just going to have to deal with it. Yeah. And, you know, there was this idea that I'd be blunting their personality or making them conform to other people's expectations. And I didn't want to like file away their rough edges, if you like. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And that was the driver, essentially, was that I didn't want to compromise that. But over time, as you probably experienced, you see your kids struggling and you understand that they don't have to go through those struggles if we're comfortable with them at least trying medication.
Yeah. And I think this is where the stigma comes in around what we're actually giving the medication for. So, for instance, we have a physical impairment. We would feel like if someone, I don't know, if it was an antibiotic or pain relief, you'd give something to somebody because it makes them feel better. Yeah. But because it's around the mind, and there's still so much way we need to go around actually understand what the mind needs and what how it impacts the rest of our body, we're reluctant. Yeah, so I do think that stigmatism's still there and it impacts how we feel about it. But equally, going back to that, I felt like you, I don't want to water down their authenticity as children. Like I don't want to dumb that down. They shouldn't have to be suiting. It's just very difficult if you have a child that, I don't know if you deal with VCB, so should I explain VCB?
Please do, because it's not anything that I'm familiar with.
So VCB stands for violent and challenging behaviour.
Oh, okay. We do. I just didn't have an acronym for it.
The word. And there is actually a group which is led by Yvonne Newbold, who does a lot of work.
Yeah, she's incredible. Newbold Hope.
Yeah, and it's very difficult, because if you're dealing with that kind of situation where it's child on parent violent reactions, that they've lost control and they can't respond, and not just to us. So, for instance, my daughter that has those, and we've peeked through crisis after crisis where that could be unrelenting, and that could be, we could have 2 of those or 3 physical breakdowns where the whole house could be trashed. I could be attacked. I have to do everything to keep everything safe. When you're living on a knife's edge like that, your child is not happy. Like they desperately need something to feel better. And it's that area that I feel like, for me, that was a no-brainer then. It became a point of, I didn't even worry then about morally Was it the right thing to do? It became a necessity, like we need something.
Yeah, and you've got to try everything as well, isn't it? I mean, you try and do everything, because it's not just one child that you need to keep safe and regulated. It's all of them, especially in a fully neurodivergent household. That's quite upsetting and triggering for the others as well. So it's balancing those needs, and so your initial view of like, I'm not going to medicate them. It's like, no, I mean, why is that a hill I'm dying on? As you say, people have medication for all kinds of things. So we need to open our minds a little bit. I have a friend of mine called Angela put a post on Facebook that sort of summarised that for me. And I wanted to read it out because I thought it just beautifully encapsulated what I was struggling to put into words. So this is a post from my friend Angela. I'm going to read it in its entirety. It's World Mental Health Day, and as someone who's experienced fragile mental health for decades, I want to say something about medication. There's still a stigma attached to taking meds for mental health conditions. I remember once, after a particularly low period, crying on my dad's shoulder and saying that I didn't want to take my meds. I just wanted to be well in my head without them. And he asked me why, and I said I felt they were a weakness and I should be able to get better myself. He said that if I stopped taking my meds, then he should too. He was a type 1 diabetic. He said that by my logic, it must also be a weakness that he couldn't produce insulin himself. The pancreas is an organ. The brain is an organ. Sometimes our brains are deficient in something chemical, or sometimes our brains simply aren't structured in the way that the majority of brains are structured, and therefore forcing them into living in society as it's structured causes problems. So, if like me, you need medication to function, don't let people that have never been in your shoes tell you how you should feel about that. You wouldn't tell a diabetic person their medication is unnecessary. Please don't say it to someone with mental health problems. Believe me, I've tried to manage without meds, and if I could have, I would have. Let's stop with this narrative that people that need medication for mental health are somehow not trying to fix themselves. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk. That was the sign off.
That is so true, isn't it?
But I really liked it. I thought, that's a really clear way of putting it, because it is, as you say, because it's an invisible disability and because it's neurological, you don't see medication as being as valid as someone who, for example, needs insulin. So, I think, as you were saying, there is a stigma to taking medication. And, not only did Tam and I have to overcome our own stigma, there's a view that if you medicate your children, you're creating zombie children who don't have any joy or any life in them. They're just sort of walking around lobotomized or something, which definitely isn't the case. But that was a fear. But there's also, I think, the judgment from other people, the perception that other people are going to judge you. I mean, is that something that you felt?
Yeah, definitely. And it just discussing that, it took me back to when I was working in schools, and I used to hear teaching staff talking about children who were medicated and how they'd been up to their medication and how the parents wanted it like that. They wanted them to be dumbed down so that they didn't have to deal with them, or they couldn't deal with their behaviour. And you kind of realise that there's such lack of understanding around there. And if you think this is coming from teaching staff,
that's horrendous.
You think, what chance do you have to the average person out there that hasn't got that experience with children or working in around like any spectrum?
And also, they don't want your child in their school unmedicated. There's a reason they're taking it, right?
It's a real misunderstanding and misjudgment of why would a parent want to dumb their child down? Nobody wants to dumb their child down like that.
No, exactly. And that is, like, as you just touched on there, that this implication that it's sort of lazy parenting.
Yeah.
That we just, we can't cope with them because they're too much, and we can't be bothered to discipline them, and we can't be bothered to parent them properly. So just shove them full of drugs, and then they'll be much more compliant.
So go back to your question there. This is really relevant for me, which I know that you know slightly a bit about this, but I've had repeated situations where I've been accused of FI. So for anyone new to this, it's fabricated or induced illness, is creating fabricated or induced illness in your children. So there used to be a thing called Munchausen by proxy that often referred to, but now FI is such a big thing that's being kind of pushed around safeguarding concerns for all professionals around the country, and they seem to be, really pushing this one out like that's what we're seeing. But
so what's they thought that you were trying to make up your kids' profiles just to get them medicated?
Yes, and this has happened.
That's insane.
It's happened repeatedly.
Really?
So, for instance, my eldest daughter, she was 5 years old when she first tried to harm herself quite significantly, and she'd hit crisis. and we went through A&E as we were advised to do, and she was admitted into hospital at that point, which accelerated all the services. So trigger warning there before I mention the word suicide.
Right.
She's trying to act upon that that situation, and that has been something that has happened repeatedly. So we've been through CAMS and PALMS and all these different services for her mental health, and to unpick what's really going on for her. Again, in 2019, she went back into hospital. She's also then was placed on something called a CETR, which is a care emergency treatment review. And that's like a plan that you'd put children on, or adults are on, that are autistic or have learning disabilities and are at risk of being an inpatient
Right.
at Tier 4 level. So she was placed onto that. So you can tell, I'm kind of building a picture here of how many years of services have been involved, and how, she then went to a specialist school. She was put on a 2-to-1 kind of cover because she was excluded from that because people couldn't manage her. This is kind of building this picture of a child that has really struggled through everything and is still unmedicated.
Yes. Is she diagnosed at this point?
Yeah, she's been diagnosed. She's 5 years old by the NHS. That's been repeatedly reinforced by different professionals, and it kind of goes on. So we get to last year, and she hit crisis yet again. And we were following their advice from the services, because they said, you have to kind of build up a picture here of what's going on, and you're managing it too well. So we carry on. The police are called, ambulance.
You were accused of managing it too well.
Managing it too well. So, they're not seeing the picture of actually, we've got professionals that have had to keep stepping away because people couldn't work with her, and because of the risks were so high. And this is the level, this is documented through services upon services. So from last year, she went into crisis, and she was then at risk of being admitted again, to the point she'd got admitted again for this Christmas. And at that point, instead of actually supporting us, one of my questions was, I think it's time we need medication. Like, they had their own referrals. The paediatric team had written to professionals 3 years ago saying, this isn't something we can issue, but we think medication needs to happen now for this child. I brought it up once in one of our assessments, and that became a red flag to everybody. And all they've now tried to do is push this narrative again that mum can't handle the child and wants to medicate her, and that's all they can see. So from that, since then, we've just had continuous, and these allegations actually did start in 2021 by the social services. They said that I would intervene too much, or I was helping her too much, and there would be all different kind of reasons as to what they were saying. Like, I didn't allow a professional to deal with it, but the professional...
They can't deal with it. They've literally told you that they can't deal with it.
They can't deal with it. So I'm being batted around like a ping pong, not knowing how I'm, just trying to manage to keep this all afloat. And so I've had allegations of fee that have been on I've been dangled with child protection.
Obviously, there's no joined up thinking there, though, right? Because all they got to do is read your notes and read the history. And I'm guessing they're just seeing, this is the moment that they're actually reading this set of notes.
Yeah.
It's so infuriating. So how did that manifest itself when they sort of accused you of that? How did you find that out?
Because I was then thrown out. I was not allowed to go into meetings anymore, and nor was anybody that was actually... The other professionals in the health teams that was seeing the same as what I was saying were excluded out. Or my parents are carers as well as part of the package. They were pushed out. They weren't allowed to be part of. So anyone who contradicted the view that I was fee was kind of thrown out of the system, because they wanted to build this case of, this is what we believe and we're going to find evidence for it. And they never could find any because it just wasn't existent. I was just a parent trying to support.
Yeah, exactly. So how long did this go on? Have they sort of accepted this now?
I've had a letter of apology from the social teams, who have now put us right high up now. We have a very high service manager in our county that's actually running our case now to stop the fee allegations that are still going on.
It's just another battle that you don't have to fight. You shouldn't be fighting. You should be getting accommodation support for this. Yeah. And you've had all of this support going through your journey. It's just they're not reading it and they're not listening to other people. The fact they're kicking out other professionals who are saying, actually, no, this isn't the case.
Yeah.
I don't.
You heard about PDA, then they just kept saying parents making it up. Mum thinks it's this, but it's not true, kind of thing. But then in their own diagnoses that they've got on the NHS since 2016, they've got that she's autistic and she has anxiety, she's ADHD, and with the PDA profile. So this is all in their own notes, their own recommendations, and it's huge because there's no accountability for this. This is the difficulty. It just means, so in this long process of my daughter being in crisis since last February of 23, it resulted eventually in her being admitted to hospital,
Right.
Which they then discharged her because they said, we've watched her on the ward, and she's only bad when mum's there. Kind of thing.
No, she's only safe when you're there. She can only express herself when you're there.
Yeah.
She's not masking, right?
Yeah, completely. And they would say, well, okay, she wants to go home. You're keeping her here at this point. And I'm like, I'm not keeping her here. We just need an assessment done. Anyway, eventually we've now gone through a private route who checked all of the notes and queried whether probably that there's some other issues with her mood swings around there. What else could actually be in play? So with that support, we've now tried a drug called lamotrigine.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's for epilepsy, but why she's on it is to actually just create some of those delays in her responses so that she wasn't having such flash.
She's not so reactive.
Yeah.
So obviously the stigma that you're getting is not just from ourselves about taking medication, but the authorities as well, which is a horrendous journey. And I'm so sorry you've had to go through that, Danielle. That's not anything that I've had, fortunately. But again, it's so dependent on where you are as well in this country, isn't it? It's so inconsistent. Depends on your local authority and what they're, everyone's experiences are wildly different, which is why I made that disclaimer at the start. Yeah. People are going through different things, so there's this question of whether you're being a bad parent. So when the authorities then try and put that on you as well, you just got to fight your corner again. And we were going through that issue with the stigma side of things, and are we right to medicate and that side of things. And the thing that made a difference really was Tam is a science teacher. So Tam is really very much into science, and so needed to understand the science of it rather than the kind of the feel of it. Needed to understand, what does it do and how does it do it and how does it work? And Tam got hold of a book. I've got the book here, which is this one here, The Parent's Guide to ADHD Medicines. I don't know if you've read it. It's by Professor Peter Hill, and it is very sciencey about exactly what it does and how it does it and why it does it. And once Tam understood the science, then the stigma was sort of removed. It's like, okay, I get it. I get what it does and why it does it. I'll obviously put a link to that in the show notes in case anyone else wants to to look at it. But that was the thing that then gave us the confidence. I say us, Tam, because as a scientist, I'm gonna bow to the science there, to then pursue the medication route, and that's what we did.
I think it's really helpful. I think having that again, like you said earlier on about researching it, having that information gives you an informed view, and if you've got that view, you can actually make a balanced judgment on this.
Yeah,
do you know what
you are also arming yourself with knowledge for the professionals as well, because very often they will try and tell you something. You're like, well, actually, you're not as current as me in my thinking. Your thinking is not as current as mine in this. So that.
Although I'm just going to be slightly wary on that one, is you can have as much information as you like, but sometimes other professionals can feel it can actually make them, I know in fee kind of.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
One of their red flags is almost like the parent having all this abundance of information on this kind of subject. And if you think about this as a neurodivergent person who kind of, as a parent, we're going to throw ourselves into that subject.
It becomes your special interest, your hyper-focus.
For instance, Tam there with the science, with having that information, when they've done that, they've got that information to their hand. To a professional, it seems to be like a defense thing of as soon as somebody comes along with all of this information, for us, we're neurodivergent, and that's how we communicate. But almost like it's a red flag to professionals. Yeah,
it's difficult, isn't it?
How you tread that.
Oh, dude. It's a tightrope, isn't it? Because you don't want to be just fobbed off when you know otherwise. And obviously, you're not going to stop us researching what's going on with our own kids and understanding more about what's out there. but you have to drip feed it. Oh, it's a nightmare, isn't it? Part of this judgment feeds into this view that being prescribed medication is the easy route, right? Let's just get them medicated, pump them full of drugs, and it makes things a bit easier for us, which is, as we both know, absolute bullshit. The process of being prescribed medication is really complex, and it's a massive nightmare, and the idea that it's the easy way out is very far from the truth. And I think that that's something that I wanted to kind of cover in this episode is quite how many different sort of cogs have to be whirring and working together in order to get prescribed medication for your kids, and how much admin you're inviting into your life when you do that, because it's enormous. And hopefully people who think that the medication is the quick and easy route might think twice about it in the future. So let's assume that diagnosis has happened. We're not going into the diagnosis thing. That's its own unwieldy nightmare. But let's assume that they are diagnosed, and they're diagnosed with ADHD. Let's just take that as an example. As I said before, you're not going to get medication for autism, nor should you look for it. But let's take ADHD as our example, right? If you choose the medication route, what happens? Well, firstly, it depends on the diagnosis pathway, because you've got your options for diagnosis are the CAMS route or the private route. So let's look at the CAMS route first of all. CAMS, if you're not familiar, or if you're listening from outside the UK, stands for Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services, which they're trying to rebrand it, aren't they? They changed the name. I thought they should like teasing a rebrand. It's like, nah, we know what this is. It doesn't matter what you call it, mate. Same shit, different name. But CAMS, to be fair, they're trying their best, but they are overwhelmed and overworked and underfunded, and so it's a slow and arduous process with CAMS. But essentially, if you are diagnosed through CAMS and you want to go the medication route, you go through their process, which in itself can take years. So you've got a long time to get diagnosed, and then they give you the choice of like, okay, you've got ADHD, do you want to medicate? If you choose not to medicate at that point, they go, all right, can't help you then. There's no other option with CAMS. It's either medication or they'll just like sign you off and then you're on your own. So if you decide to go for medication, then you've got to go through their route. And if you do want meds as a parent, and I don't know if you had this with your CAMS, I don't know how different experiences of CAMS work, but you've got to be trained in the science of medication. Do you have to go on a course to understand what it's doing, why it's doing, and how to do it? Did you have that? Or is that just...
No. I've never heard of that.
Yeah, well, that was another hurdle in our way. So Tam had to do that. It was supposed to be a 6-week wait, and it was 4 months. Because obviously, you know, time moves in different circles in the world of CAMS. And basically had to go to a 2-hour course to be taught about how different medications work and to understand that. And Tam knew more about it than the person running the course, because Tam had read this book and it was fully into the science and the research. But it's so much of this sometimes is a case of just ticking the box. Look, we've done what you asked, right? Yeah. Can you just put us on the next step on this arduous path? So did that, and we got on to the next step in the journey. And the thing is that it takes so long. And our medication, really, we only really want the medication to get them through school, because that's the thing that they're having to go through and they're struggling with. And when they're older, they can make their own decisions. But at this point, I'm just trying to make it a bit easier for them to engage with school and to get through what is a very difficult environment for them. But by the time we've got through this process of diagnosis and medication with CAMS, they're going to be like in retirement. Yeah. They've gone through school, through the whole adult life. Yeah. It takes so long. So it's a nightmare. Now, the other option is a much quicker option, which is the private route. So if you want to speed it up, you can get diagnosis privately and you can get prescribed medication privately, but you will need a lot of money.
Yeah.
And with Otto, we decided that he was struggling so much and it was such a problem. His anxiety was through the roof and we were really worried about him that we had to go private. We had to find the money. We managed to find the money and we went through the private diagnosis route, and that was great. It was amazing. And I'll talk about that in a separate episode, but it was a really positive experience where they assessed him for autism and ADHD at the same time and gave really comprehensive report, and that was great. But then if you want to medicate, You have to be prescribed through the clinic that's just prescribed. So you can't go to a different clinic who do cheaper prescriptions. So if you go through that clinic, the amount that they charge for consultations and prescriptions is really expensive. So the only other option, because they won't let you go to another private clinic for the prescription side of things, is to go to CAMS. And we're trying to avoid CAMS because we're trying to get out, because we know that it takes so much longer. So yeah, that's a bit of a problem, but you can do that. Did you go for a private diagnosis?
Not for a diagnosis, only for the mental health side of things
Right.
for my eldest, because we've been pushed around from CAMS for the last few years without any movement onwards, really. And at that point, all I'm getting hitting is a wall of no support, because we'll have to do another assessment. Or also they didn't have the kind of awareness around how they'd need to approach a neurodivergent psychiatric appointment.
What, at CAMS?
Yeah, at CAMS. So often they'd think, that my daughter could just go there and do the assessment for an hour and a half, questions with like 2 assessors there in an empty room, and be able to do that. So she did it once and just never went back.
But that is staggering that CAMS, child and adolescent, and I'm going to emphasise the MH, mental health services, don't understand neurodivergent brains and how they can cope in specific environments.
So we'd have to do it online, but I would, only because I kept trying to say it's not parents stopping her, like she can't do it. So we'd have to try and adapt. So there's lots of ways I had to keep trying to lead ways to adapt. And with all the assessments that they did, they still never came to a conclusion, which is why we then went through the private way, and they did get a conclusion quite quickly. And they managed to speak to my daughter, but she would be off camera, and she would be able to, they'd allow her to speak through me, or different kind of ways of doing it, really. But what I do have to say is I want to flip the other side of it, because my middle daughter was under CAMS, still the same area, same trust. And the support she had with that CAMS worker was absolutely incredible. She went above and beyond, trying to do different ways to get there and build and work on her anxiety and stuff. And it was incredible.
That's amazing.
So the adaptions, and I really want to just reflect that good practice, because it's really easy to go, everyone who works for that particular service might feel like we're kind of running it down, but it's not. Actually, it's when you see really good practice, you notice the difference.
And also, it's inconsistent, isn't it?
Yeah. And what's crazy is when I was under those fee allegations and all of the work that was going on, I had that good CAMS worker from a different team saying, we work really well with parent. We've worked with her for 2 years, blah, 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 kind of giving a full picture of what she was saying. But then the rest of the team were all saying, parents making it up. So it's really strange, like how you can have like 2 different experiences and where the information's not being shared.
Yes, absolutely, and it differs from local authority to local authority as well. So there's no consistency there, and that's the frustrating thing, isn't it?
But back to that subject, what you were saying is about the private thing. So that's why I ended up being in the private route. So for our situation, it's been slightly different, because CAMS were still kind of on board, and we're now starting to try and, since maybe May, with the private clinic, but because it's too expensive to be able to pay for the private medication all of the time, we're now going through the titration period. So do you want to explain that?
Yeah, I will. I'm going to, before I get on to titration, there is that other pathway that I wanted to say, because this is is the route that we went with Otto in the end, is that he was diagnosed privately, and we didn't want to pay the exorbitant fees to keep taking him to London for the titration meetings. Titration, you've heard me say it a number of times, and I think I should probably explain it. Titration is essentially the process of working out which medication is going to work for your specific child and which dose of that medication. And we'll get onto that process in a minute, but I'm just kind of explaining what it is so you understand the terminology. So we decided that we wanted to get him to CAMS, and if you're going from private diagnosis to then the CAMS prescription route, that's another enormous amount of admin. And again, everyone's got a different experience, but my experience is that that it was inconsistent. The only consistent thing really is the sheer volume of admin that you have to get through to do it, because you take it to CAMS and go, look, I've done your job for you. I've got a private diagnosis. It cost me a lot of money. Here it is. It conforms to the NICE guidelines. can you, because that's another thing you have to do if you're going to hand it over to CAMS from a private diagnosis, it needs to conform with the NICE guidelines so that CAMS can go, all right, they did things properly, they know what they're doing. It's not just some dude called Barry in the back of a pub going, yeah, he's got ADHD. It's a proper official diagnosis, right? And they've followed proper scientific and medical procedure. So you then take it to them, and in theory, they will look at that and go, yeah, I get that they've done things properly. We can accept this diagnosis from this private practitioner. Normally, they'll have a list of ones that they accept. And then they'll go, yeah, that's great. So now we can do the prescription process. Sometimes they don't accept the private diagnosis. So we had with Otto, they were like, yep, this is reasonable. We can now start the process of prescribing medication for Otto. But with Jay, they were like, nah, don't know who these guys are. It's like they conform to the nice guidelines. I know they're not on your list, but could you maybe add them to the list? No, I don't know who they're. Fly-by-night cowboys. So, for God's sake. So then you have to go to the back of the queue for the CAMS and get a CAMS diagnosis, which, as we've discussed, it's like 4 or 5 years. Yeah. It's insane. So that is frustrating. But fortunately, Otto got accepted, which means the express route. They don't call it that. This is what I'm calling it. It's by no means is it an express route. It's a year. Yeah. It is a long time, because, again, he's struggling in school. This is a year of him struggling and going, well, we want to try medication to stop him struggling. You're going to have to wait a year just to start the process of titration. So we had to bring him into CAMS as well. You have to bring him in and go, look, see, he's got ADHD, as he's like hanging upside down off a chair. See, look, he's definitely got ADHD. And then he just took one look at him and went, yeah, all right, I agree. So you do that. And because they want to see for themselves for some reason. Okay, fine. And then you still have to do the medication course, which is the one that Tam did. And once you've done that, you start the titration process. And this is where the fun begins. Yeah. So all of that shit just to get to this bit. And you went a slightly different route with titration for your ADHD meds. What route did you go down for that?
We still don't have them. We're still waiting for that.
Oh God, well,
process at the moment. So are slightly different, but it's moved over to shared care at the moment with our GP. Mm-hmm. So the GP has taken on the lamotrigine for the those mood swings.
Right.
For the moment.
That was prescribed by CAMS, was it?
By the private clinic.
Right, okay, yeah. So
eventually they will take over, but whilst to stop me keep paying for it from one of our big child in need meetings, it was like, why is mum still paying for this? Yeah. So hence the reason we got the GP to take it over, but with the intention that now we're back going towards, we're still with CAMS, we're just waiting for them to actually pick up what they should have done 2 years ago.
But just to clarify for the listeners, shared care is basically what happens once you're titrated. So once you know what medication it is and what dosage it is, then you can do shared care to then ping that to the GP so that you can keep going back to the GP for repeat prescriptions and, for kind of reviews. But you still had to do the titration process through the private practitioner. Yeah.
So for us, at that point, we've got that one under the radar, but the ADHD side, part of what I was saying earlier about the mood swings have started to gradually slow down, but it's now apparent that she struggles with motivation. She struggles. So ours are very different. It's not necessarily around school or that kind of thing. This is more around being able to motivate herself, being able to leave her bedroom, being able to cope with any tasks and the order and sequencing of tasks just to do basic functioning. And that's really apparent because she's housebound like for weeks on end.
Yeah, really. Okay. Yeah, I mean, this is where I should probably kind of talk a little bit about Jay as well, because Jay was prescribed anti-anxiety medication, essentially. He was in a really rough place, and we went to a private psychiatrist, again, because we were really, really worried about him, and they diagnosed him and then prescribed him. We did titration through those as well, and it's made a massive difference. So we're now doing shared care with his medication relatively recently, but that's made an enormous difference in our household. To Jay, and again, he's wanting to come out of his room more and see people more and hang out more, and he's able to kind of handle things outside of the house a little bit better. He's still not there, he's still not in the place we want him to be, but it's definitely removed the sort of the fog, I think, that was stopping him from wanting to engage with people. So that's definitely helped.
those barriers are huge, and for us that's where we're at still, really. So the idea of going through we've now gone back to CAMS to actually try an ADHD medication that might just pick up some of this, so for her motivation and stuff like that. But we're still looking at like anti-anxiety, really. What do we need to actually touch on that? So it's still in that early period, but because I can't manage to pay for all of those things, it really should be going back to CAMS. So we're just waiting for that. And actually, as we speak, the psychiatrist is coming to do a home visit today.
Okay.
And I do it from home for the first time. So we're 2 years down.
Wow. I'd say finally get it. After 2 years.
After multiple complaints and going through the parliamentary healthcare, social care ombudsman, because it's been such a failure and negligence on this case, we now have a new team, and the new psychiatrist from CAMS is showing complete different approach, and it's making a big difference. So in those couple of weeks since we've met them, they're now coming to the home. We're ready to start moving forward. So it's going to be a watch this space kind of thing.
Yeah, but at least you've got them to pay attention, which, you know, enormous amount of respect to you, Danielle, because it's like, I know, you know, the amount that you have to fight, and going to a parliamentary ombudsman is one of the things that I hadn't got on my list of shit we have to deal with to get medication. That was you know, that's insane, the amount of stuff you have to do, but well done for doing that. And Jesus. So obviously we've mentioned titration, but I think we need a deep dive into how horrendous the process of titration is. And there's no way around it. It's a necessary process, but it's incredibly difficult to navigate, because essentially you're trying to get the right medication and the right dose for your specific child. Now, our children are neurodivergent. They present in wildly different ways in wildly different situations. Some might need medication to deal with anxiety. Some might need medication to deal with other issues. And different medication respond to different people and different neurotypes in different ways. So the process of finding that silver bullet that is going to help them get through is really difficult. And I get it, but the amount of admin that you open up for that is incredible, because it involves monthly meetings, first of all. So let's just say they've agreed that we're going to go through the titration process. The first thing is getting them in to CAMS. Right. Now, getting Otto there is a massive problem. Because you've got to take him out of school. This is the thing about the CAMS appointments for titration. They give you very little warning. They give you a date and a time, and that is it. It's just like, that is set in stone. You can't move that. You can't request a change, because if they go, oh, we'll change that. Yeah, it's going to be 2027 now. It's like, no, okay, I'll take it. I'll take your fucking slot. All right, fine. So then, like, you know, and I work. So I have to then arrange with work that I'm going to do that. Or Tam has to take time off work to get him in. Then we've got to get him out of school, which causes Otto enormous anxiety. The very reason we're medicating him in the first place. We are exacerbating that problem just to get him medicated. So we tell him in the morning that we're going to pull him out of school. He's hugely anxious for the whole day. I pick him up and he's in tears, obviously, you know, so I give him sweets. That seems to help, right? Make it a bit fun. Get him in the car, get him to CAMS, and then we have the meeting. And in the meeting, they ask your child how they feel at the moment on their medication. Have you had that?
Yeah.
My child doesn't know when he needs the toilet. Right? he can't tell you how he's feeling in response to a specific medication.
Yeah.
But they ask him, and their word is really, like, way more important than ours.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is really frustrating.
And also those questions are too open-ended for our kids. I don't know if you've been in any of those kind of assessments where they just don't really actually understand what's being asked, because they don't really understand what you really mean.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Like, there's been different assessments we've been like that, and she looks at them and she goes, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you actually mean. And I'm like, they just repeat the question back to her as if like you should know.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lack of training on how to actually approach.
Yeah, I think that's on a person by person basis within CAMS. So we've had some fantastic people. There's someone that she is also neurodivergent herself, so it kind of helps. I think she gets it, and no, she's excellent. But then if we get the old dude, oh man, don't want him. Like Tam finds it a real struggle dealing with him. Tom gets really frustrated, and I just get these angry texts. I've got him again. Oh, God, he's so slow. Because Tom's ADHD as well. So she's like, come on, we know how this works. Let's just fucking speed it up, dude. We all know why we're here. Let's get this going. Because Otto's wildly dysregulated and flapping about all over the place. Yeah. We just need to get in and out. But they have to do this whole process of asking them how they feel and listening to that, which is, even though he can't articulate it, he's an unreliable witness, essentially. Otto, don't ask him how he feels. Ask me how he feels. I can tell you now. I'm constantly observing his behaviour.
Yeah.
So anyway, what they do is then they go, we're going to try him on this medication. Okay, whatever, fine. Yes, let's try him on a medication. And then you have to wait for a prescription. I don't know if you have a similar thing, but for whatever reason, the person that says, yes, we're going to try this medication is not the person that writes the prescription. So, and where we have to go is actually quite far. So until I worked it out, we basically would go, okay, we'll wait for the prescription, and you drive away, and then you don't fucking hear back. So then you have to phone them and go, what about their prescription? They go, oh, who are you? And then you have to go through that. But you're talking to a receptionist. You're not talking to them. So they're like, well, we'll write that down and we'll get it to the person that's going to prescribe it, and then we'll get back to you. But again, they don't get back to you. So this massive back and forth just to get the prescription that they've agreed to give you in the first place.
And everyone thinks this is the easy life.
Yeah, exactly, right? So eventually they go, okay, we've got your prescription. So sometimes I've driven back there and gone, you said my prescription's ready. And they're like, nah, never heard of you. It's like, for God's sake. And then I've got like Tamers phone them, and then they go, oh yeah, oh fine, that's all right. I don't know quite, but you get your prescription. Great. Yeah. We can start the process. I've got the prescription. And the issue with titration is that some medications exacerbate different symptoms in your child, as you were kind of mentioning earlier, right? So for Otto, who's autistic, so some of the medication he's tried ramps his autism up enormously. It gives him enormous anxiety. So while it might give him more of an ability to focus, his anxiety is through the roof. So we tried one medication, and within a week it was like, this is not working. He was in tears, like, we're like, can you put your shoes on? And he's in absolute tears. It's like, this is not normal. This is not you.
That's what ADHD medications were like for my eldest when she started them when she was about 7 or 8. In the end, I just had to keep saying, I'm just not comfortable with, I just don't feel like, I didn't have the problem giving her ADHD medication, but it felt like it was not actually helping.
It make it worse, wasn't it?
It was making it worse. It was making her more OCD. She was starting to, start getting really obsessive about everything. And it just was a nightmare. One of the added things for her as well is that every tiny incremental change made a big difference. Right. So she was actually on such a minimal dose. So we never actually got to the point where she was actually on her optimum dose for her weight to actually see if it would work, because we'd take one tiny little 2.5 milligram up and it would be all over the place.
Oh, really?
And I did hear from one of the private clinics that they're very aware that actually tiny little increments can make a big difference. So sometimes people don't always understand that is going to make a big impact. Like it's going to take a while just to settle. Sometimes doing things slower and just being able to observe until you hit a bit of a plateau. I think that's key, really. Because
that's the thing, as you say, it takes a while to bed in. So you have to observe them over time. And they do say you got to give it like at least a month until you can see. But with Otto, when he was on this one that was just making him break down into tears all the time, it's like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to put him through that. I know that this is the meds. I know that it's not working for him. So we're not going to do it. And then we'll go back and just say, look, this is not the one. So let's try a different medication. And that's what we did. But the other thing, because it's like whack-a-mole, isn't it? You fix one symptom and then 2 others pop up. So it's like, oh, fucking hell. So I've got to deal with that now. And then just trying to get them this weird little balance, just to try and get them to a point where they can just cope with school.
It's almost like it's not just though you're one child, then the other ones will start to pop up. So then you've got like the whole game, haven't you?
Yeah, because they're triggering each other. Then it's.
Or if you settle one down, the other thing pops up.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the other thing about the CAMS appointments that you get through as well. I didn't mention. If they send you and go, you got an appointment on this date at this time. It's like, fuck, drop everything. We've got CAMS to listen. Right, we're gonna go, but they don't tell you which child it is, right? If you've got multiple children going through the process, which one am I bringing? Let's bring the whole family. Take your pick. Could be any of us, to be honest. We're all here again.
Observe us like a zoo.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I tell you what, why do you come to us? It's much easier, and you can tell us who you need, and we'll make them available.
Two for the price of one.
The other thing to think about is when you're trying to work out if the medication is working, there is other stuff going on in their lives. So you don't know what is to do with autism, what is to do with the medication. So specifically with Otto, recently, he's on this medication, and we took it in the summer, and it was all right. It seemed to be working. He wasn't dysregulated. Mm-hmm. So we kind of increased the dose, and that was okay. And then he started school. And this year, in year 5, he's found it really difficult. And it's been heartbreaking for me to pick him up from school. And he is in meltdown when I pick him up. Mm-hmm. And they lead him out, and I can just see, he's crying and he's tense, and and it's heartbreaking. So I know that he's having a really, really tough time. What I don't know is what is causing this tough time. So I'm assuming at this point that maybe it's to do with the fact that they shuffled the classes in year 5, so he's got different classes. I don't know if it's because year 5 is harder because they get a little bit more academic. I don't know if it's because the new classroom is noisier because he's now got a classroom in the middle of a corridor and there's a lot of noise that is dysregulating him, and if that is finding that difficult. I don't know if it's because his classroom is now further away from the toilet and he can't ask for the toilet because he has to leave classroom and he doesn't like to do that, so he's like just really needs a wee, or the fact he hasn't eaten his food because his medication is suppressing that and he's really hungry. All of these things could be causing this, and I have no idea which one it is. And we tried sort of accommodating everything and talking to the school about it, and this week we were like, it's the meds. It's the meds doing this. This is why he's so dysregulated. So we tried for a week, because fortunately it's one of the meds that you don't have to keep going. There are some that you have to do every single day, and if you don't do that, I don't know, they explode or something. I don't know. I just know it's serious. You don't do that, right? But this is one that you can kind of come on and off. And he's on Elvance. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yes, I do.
So we tried taking him off it for a week, and he's a different child. He's so happy when I pick him up now. And it's like, that's what it was. But you have to put them through this fucking heartbreak. And us through this heartbreak just to work that out, you know, and then you have to go, well, something we thought was probably working, definitely not working. Oh, I'm going to go back to Cams. Oh, God, I'm going to go back to the guy.
Merry-go-round.
Yeah, but you guys start again now on a new medication. And so Tam and I have just had this discussion about going back and trying a new medication. And Tam had a call with them and they went, oh, we're going to try him on this. And Tam was like, that's the one I asked for in the first place.
Yeah,
that's the one that is recommended for autistic ADHD kids, and the one that, but they don't do that. They don't listen to you, obviously, because because what do we know?
They made my daughter very dysregulated. I stopped that after 2 or 3 days. I felt like she could not cope at all.
Yeah, this is there, and again, this is disclaimer time, but it's just finding out what's right for your specific child. So none of the advice that we give in terms of specific medications is going to be can be taken as anything that's going to help your child. Just you're going to have to go through the process, and it's horrible. The whole titration process is horrible, but you do have to trust your instincts when you kind of spot a difference in them, because if they ask the child. You're not getting the answer that you need. So we've been going through the titration process for Otto for a year, and we still haven't got it right. So we're gonna keep going. Now with Jay and ADHD medication, he tried it. He didn't like the way it made him feel. Said it gave him a stomachache. Didn't want to do it, and we're like, fine. He's got PDA, so he's got to be on board with it anyway. And also, to be fair, his ADHD symptoms are nowhere near as pronounced as Otto's. So it wasn't anything that we felt we needed to kind of fight for him. So he's not on ADHD medication, and that's okay.
Yeah. And as well, I think the child's got to really have the full autonomy here, really, because even regardless of the PDA side of it, the child's got to want the medication. Not that they want the medication, but they've got to want the improvements that it's going to bring them for them to actually feel like it's a worthwhile thing to be doing. Do you know what I mean? Because as parents, I don't really feel like morally we should be making that decision for them unless it's something they really feel that they're happy to do. Do you know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah, but when they're young and they don't really know, and again, Otto doesn't know his own mind. So you're gonna, sometimes and that's one of the things that calms him when he's really dysregulated, is going, I'm taking charge now. And that actually, if I said that to Jay, that would not go down well at all. But for Otto, he relaxes, like, look, I'm telling you what to do. I don't need you to make a decision. This is happening. And
then it helps.
Yeah, it does. So once you're actually prescribed medication, you've been through that whole process, as we know. One of the challenges I wasn't expecting is actually getting hold of the medication itself. It is a nightmare sometimes to get that. So they go, right, okay, we're prescribing you this thing. And then you have to try and find it. Right? You've got to find out which pharmacy stocks it, because they don't all stock all the medications in all the doses. Once you've actually got your prescription, which is, again, isn't easy, it's sometimes ringing around. I mean, you've got to go to the pharmacy and go, have you got this? And they go, no, we've got to order it in. And then you've got to get them to order it in and keep checking in on them, because, they're not as bad as CAMS, but you do still need to keep on top of it. And also there's an ADHD medication shortage. Have you been impacted by that?
I haven't.
You're not on the ADHD medication, are you now?
No, but we may well be. Once she starts, then it could be a big difference. But I hear it a lot through every.
That shortage is a flipping nightmare, because you end up ringing around different pharmacies going, you're like a smackhead, basically. Have you got any in? Just trying to find the medication that you need is insane. Like ringing around and trying to get them. But let's say you've actually found the medication. You've managed to get hold of some, and in the right dosage. You take it home, and then you begin the process of trying to get your kids to take the medication, which is not an easy job for my lot. Are yours okay with taking medication? Are they sort of on board with it?
No, not very well, really. My middle daughter can't take even Calpol. She gets really stressed about that, so that's really difficult. Having said that, the melatonin they do take, which is like a hormone, isn't it? So I suppose, and it's only a tiniest little pill that doesn't make them feel anything. So I think that's fine. But in other ways, the rest, like I have managed to get things taken. Only my PDA has occasionally said, "I'm not taking that. I'm gonna annoy you. I'm not going to take that now. You've said something to me," and I kind of have to really play it so carefully, as if it's not a big deal. Eventually, she comes on board and does take.
Okay, but yeah, it's a stressful moment, right?
I do hear from a lot of other parents where their children won't take anything. Like they have serious issues around health. I think if Steph's two girls, I think she has a post on this. I'll see if I can find it and post it.
Yeah, I can put that in the show notes, because
it's really, really good, because she's got lots of advice on there that she's taken and accumulated from other parents as well about what do you do when your child
won't take the medication. That's the thing, and
they won't take it.
And we've got, because we have varying degrees of this. So Otto, bless him, he'll just take it. He's not fussed. He's great at eating and, and medication. He's like, I tell him to do something and largely he'll do it.
Yeah.
Jay, quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. So, and he's also got incredibly strong taste buds. And for whatever reason, medication always tastes horrendous. I don't know why. There's a taste in it that he is really triggered by. So he refuses to do it. And you know what the medical professionals say? Well, just hide it in some yogurt. It's like, that doesn't work. If he's got a super sense of taste, right, which he does, he can detect a grain of paprika in a dish, right? He's going to taste medication in a fucking yogurt. He also finds he doesn't like taking tablets because they're too chalky, right? So melatonin for Jay was a massive issue because he needed it, and he was crying because he couldn't get to sleep, and he knew he needed it, and he knew that it was going to help him, but he still couldn't deal with the chalkiness of it. Mm-hmm. And we had a massive battle, and Tam did a phenomenal job. Tam was like, look, would just battled for him and said he can't take them, but he really needs it. So they prescribed liquid melatonin. Did you know that you can get this?
Yeah, I think my daughter tried it at the very beginning when they kind of edged her onto the tablets.
Yeah.
But
liquid melatonin is super expensive. It's like £100 a bottle. Ooh. It's like champagne. It's ridiculous. So that's why they don't let it be known that it's out there, and that's why they don't prescribe it easily. But Tam was really persistent and got this bottle of melatonin delivered, presumably in a gold-plated suitcase, and then they opened it up and the melatonin was there. And Jay took one taste and was like, "No." I was like, "For God's sake!" So that didn't work either. And his ADHD tablets he didn't like as well. So it's very difficult to get him to take medication. Fortunately, his anti-anxiety medication is capsule form, and I think he knows it's working, and I think he's on board with it. He got to that point where he needed something, and he knew he needed something. So he's okay with that. And that's a capsule, not a chalky thing. So that's okay. India is the worst at taking medication. Oh my God, the drama of getting India to take anything at the moment. So India is currently on antibiotics for something. You know, this isn't related to any diagnosis, just antibiotics. And it's a 3-week course. And this stuff tastes awful. I get it, right? But just take it. It's for you, right? So the only way I've managed to do it now is that I have to give her to drink, and I have to stand by with a froob, right?
Ready to just
right? And it has to be the right flavour froob, because you buy in the packs of 6 and 2 of the flavours she won't have. So actually I've only got 4 active froobs I can use for this. It's getting expensive at this point. She's got to take it 3 times a day. The amount of yogurt she's going through is insane. But basically she'll drink it, and then I'm standing by with the froob to fire it into her mouth, right? So that it will get rid of the taste. And I've managed to make a bit of a game with it. I've got a bit of a song which I'm not going to sing now, but which is about trying to get the yogurt to shoot out of her nose if I fire it in quick enough. So it becomes a game, and she quite likes that. If you gamify the taking of medication, that definitely works with my kids, particularly the kind of PDA profile. The other thing that India needs, again, when taking melatonin, is I have to have a game of throwing it into her mouth from a distance. Which, if you're trying to get it to bed quickly, could take a while. But I'm getting quite good at it. It's quite a good aim. She'll just stand there with her mouth open, and I try and lob it in and see how I get on.
And then the difficulty is, though, they soon cotton on to actually, or they lose interest in that. Once it stops having a reaction of this isn't funny anymore.
I know.
Then the next issue of, how am I going to do it now? It's like you've got to reinvent it all over
Exactly.
again.
Like children's entertainers constantly. You're like Patch Adams, right?
I'm like more like Mr. Tumble, me.
So the other thing I did, again with India, we had to put some rash cream on her a while ago because she had a rash. Not a big deal. It's just some cream. She was freaked out by the smell of it. Was like, it stinks. It didn't. It smelled absolutely of nothing at all. But India was really triggered by it and massively freaked out. But it had to go on. We had to clear the rash up, right? I'm not doing it just for fun. I'm doing it for you because you don't like itching and the rash, right? But again, I had to make a game of it. So I then became Dr. Stink, turning up with his stink medicine, and Otto joined in by being Nurse Gentle. So Nurse Gentle would be there to basically hold the patient down in a gentle manner, apparently, while I put on the cream. But the shit we have to do just to get the medication into them is insane.
It's not all rubbish.
So I want to look at the positives of this, obviously, because, you know, aside from the stigma and the judgment and the nightmarish titration process, one of the positives is that medication, it does work. When you get it right, it can be a game changer. Like it has with Jay, as I was saying. It's made an enormous difference because he was in a really bad place, and this has just lifted that fog a little bit and allowed him to engage a bit. And I'm starting to see the spark back in his eyes, which is really good. I mean, have you had the similar with yours?
Yeah, definitely. Like that kind of level of, which is hard to see this morning because we've just had a few issues prior to this. But yeah, I do, you know, we are seeing something a bit better. You know, just having some freedom from the challenges is just enough, isn't it? Just to lift that, like you said, the fog, to feel a bit more positive, like, and also for my children to feel more in control of things, because I think that's part of the difficulty when you actually feel out of control. Again, like you were saying with your son, like you almost need someone to take control and just relieve some of it and make things easier. There's a safety element, isn't there, of that? And I think that's sometimes what medication can offer in these kind of scenarios.
Yes.
Well, perhaps it has anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Another of the positives, again, I know we decry CAMS, But the NHS is a massive, massive positive, I think. Because I mean, it's frustrating to deal with and it's not perfect by any means. But with all of this medication, at least we're not having to pay for all of that as well, unless you go private, obviously. Because there's a lot of people that listen to this in the US, and that is a different story.
Yeah.
That is potentially hundreds of dollars a month for the medication, and that's without the cost of visiting the doctors and stuff. So a huge positive is that, in the UK, for now at least, fingers crossed, it's affordable.
Yeah.
Let's just wave a little flag for the NHS there for that little positive, because that does make a huge difference, because the other expenses that we have to go through in our lives is...
Yeah, no, it's good. And also some of the levels of service, you could meet somebody that comes in and actually goes above and beyond to try and support and really cares for your family.
Yeah, exactly.
That's incredible. Like, I've had so many of those.
I think that, I think the majority of people that I've dealt with are like that. Just when you get a bad one, it is particularly frustrating when you're just like, you're supposed to help me. But no, there are some people that do go above and beyond, and they're amazing. And, you keep hold of them and ask for them by name when you phone. Remember their name.
Neurodiversity champions.
Okay, so we're going to look at the neurodiversity champions section of the podcast now. So this is anyone that you want to mention who is particularly helpful in the world of neurodivergency, an organisation or a person. Have you got anyone you want to mention to us, Danielle?
I mentioned Steph's Two Girls. That's a great one for the kind of PDA area.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A friend of mine who does A Boy Less Ordinary. I really like kind of the sort of pages.
Who's that?
Rebecca Hussein.
Rebecca Hussein.
Yeah, so she does a lot around, I mentioned VCB, so she talks a lot about that and about parent carers. So there's, getting the support from parent carers, I would say.
Okay.
I mean, there's so many people, all my whole network is
exactly.
Who do I pick and who don't I pick?
Okay. Well, one of the neurodiversity champions that we definitely need to mention is you, of course, Danielle. I know you've already been mentioned. Lisa Galley mentioned your online content and your posts on Instagram and that side of things, but also you're an author, right? And you've written a book.
Yeah, I've done 2 children's books, actually.
Have you done 2 now?
Yeah, actually, one of them is here. That's the first one. I'm not upside down, I'm downside up.
Oh, okay.
I co-authored that one. That was a children's book.
Mm-hmm.
But Black Rainbow is, it's about a woman who's married, who on the surface should have everything in place, but underneath she's completely crumbling and feels very unlistened to. She's got a child who's quite well-spirited and she is struggling with, she's having to cancel arrangements. She's trying to, every part of feeling of her life feels like her family are on at her. She just feels like, where can she turn to? And she's, but she has a meeting with a stranger in a park and it changes her perspective on things. So there's just a short.
That's a little teaser there. Interesting.
Yeah.
Great.
It obviously focuses on a woman who is in her early 40s or approaching 40, and she's just coming to that point in her life where things are not where she wants them to be. Yeah. So that's a little bit about it, really.
Yeah, great. And does that sort of touch upon themes of neurodiversity?
It does, completely. From her own perspective, kind of opens up her own understanding on herself. Like, if she's got a child who is the spirited child, like where does that come from? What is it? And how, because I don't want to say too much because it starts unraveling as you move on.
Awesome. Well, I will definitely put a link to that book in the show notes. You also do webinars as well, don't you?
I do, yeah. I do webinars and I do lots of talks at conferences and things like that. So in the background, I'm always beavering away.
Yeah, no, this is all good. And again, I'll put a link to your website.
Tiny epic wins.
Okay, so tiny epic wins. Now, these are the moments that neurotypical families find pretty straightforward, but we find absolutely epic wins. Do you have any tiny epic wins for us, Danielle?
My youngest daughter is starting to read and write all by herself, which is
nice.
Huge. Yeah, particularly because my children are not in school and we don't actually have school places available at the moment. So she's never really had any academic stuff. So she's actually taught herself through gaming and things. So that's amazing. A huge win for me. Yeah,
that's an epic
out
win.
Of nowhere. So it's almost like she could read overnight out of nowhere. Like, I don't know how it's been possible, but yeah, that's
just in their own time, right?
Yeah. How about you?
I've got an epic win, and this is to do with Otto and his titration meetings at CAMS, right? So he is super anxious whenever I collect him. He's in floods of tears, and he finds it really, really difficult, and he always has. And what I would do is I'd say, look, we've been given the time of 11:30, so I'm going to need to pick you up at 11. I'd tell him at the start of the day, and then going in, he would be incredibly anxious because he doesn't want to stand out. He doesn't want to be pulled out of class. It's a big issue for him. So the morning would be a write-off, and he would be a complete mess the whole rest of the day because of this anxiety. So recently, for the last one, I decided I wasn't going to tell him. I was just going to turn up. So at least he didn't have the anxiety before that. Obviously, he'd have the anxiety when it was happening. So I turned up, and he sort of came, he got taken out of class, and he came to the door, and he was looked really confused. And he went, "What's going on, Daddy?" And I went, "I'm busting you out of school." and he was like, "Okay, this is exciting." And he was really excited by it, and I got him in the car, no tears at all. We went to the meeting, he did the meeting, it was okay, and then he finished the meeting, and I was like, "Look, if you don't want to go back into school because it's going to be too much for you, we can maybe, you can come back home for the afternoon." He was like, "No, I can go and play football at lunchtime." So he wanted to go back in.
Wow.
So not only was he not dysregulated by it, but it completely removed any anxiety around the school as well of going back in.
Wow.
So that was enormous. So now every time there's a CAMS meeting, I'm not telling him, I'm busting him out. It's gamifying it again, isn't it?
Yeah, and distraction and all of the rest of it, and then making it work.
Yeah. Whereas if I did that with Jay and just rocked up and said, "I'm busting you out," he'd have gone nuts.
Yeah,
that would have not been a good thing. So different horses for different courses.
What the flip?
Okay, we've got the what the flip moments now. These are the moments where our neurodivergent children will say or do something that will completely blow our minds and baffle us. Have you got any what the flip moments for us, Danielle?
probably not that I could actually say out loud.
Okay, I've got a wealth of them. One of my what the flip moments came recently with India taking a blood test, which, India is really freaked out by anything medical. And I said, "Well, we have to get a blood test. It's really important so we know what's wrong." And then she sort of came back to me later on in the day and she went, "Why do they want to steal my blood?" And I was like, "They're not stealing it." And she went, "Well, they're not paying for it." And then she went, "It's my blood. Why don't I get to choose what I do with it?" It's like, oh, it's a fair point. But it's like,
I love their point of view as well, is they say it directly just as it is.
Oh, yeah, as it is. No question.
I did get one of those this morning, which I think I could probably just squeeze out that will just get about. Because I asked my youngest PDA to do something this morning about getting ready, and she said to me, "I'm going to give you the middle toe." And then she unraveled her toe like that to me, and I was like, "Okay."
I'll take that. Yeah, okay, we'll do that. I don't think that counts in my book of swears. That's good.
So, first time ever, I think that popped my cherry. I've never had a middle toe at me before.
No, that is amazing. I'll look forward to receiving my own middle toe at some point. Another what the flip moment I had from Jay recently, from nowhere, he just went, "Why do I taste aubergine?" I've never even had aubergine. It's like,
where did it come from? Like,
I don't know.
Mind come from?
But how do you know that it's aubergine if you've never had it? I don't understand. I'll have one more what the flip that I want to say, just because it is good. My mate Phil really likes Jay, and they get on really well. And he is now late diagnosed autistic, well, suspected autistic. And he's decided that he's going to lean into his special interests, and he wanted to connect with Jay on a special interest. So he started talking about his special interest, which was a particular game, and he was going really in depth with Jay because Jay's into gaming, and Jay just listened in silence. He was not on board. And when he stopped, he went, "You're lucky you met Sophie. You would be nowhere without that woman." It's like the judgment. Fortunately, I think Phil found that quite funny because that could have been pretty damaging to his self-esteem. Okay, that's the end of this episode of Neuro Shambles. Thank you so much for your time, Danielle, and for sharing your... No, it's a pleasure for sharing your medication journey as well, because it's, just get it off your chest, Hopefully it's been therapeutic, if nothing else.
Yeah, I think at the end of this episode, I actually feel like I need to go get some medication for myself.
Yeah, exactly.
I actually want in life.
I could take some of the stuff that Jay's rejected over the years, just see how it works. I also want to say a massive thank you to our listeners. Thank you so much for joining us yet again, and also for your lovely comments. Keep them coming. That's really nice. If you want to email us, then send an email to hello@neuroshambles.com, or you can contact us on the socials. I'm on Facebook and Instagram and Threads, and also now TikTok as well. So so contact us anyway there. It's always lovely to hear from you. The final thing that remains for me to say is have a nice life.